The Forbidden City, the heart of the Qing dynasty, rises like a promise and a prison. Within its ochre walls and beneath its gilded roofs, the Qing imperial harem is a world unto itself. A place of staggering power and endless intrigue, it is home to the emperor's consorts and their retinues. But before a girl can become a concubine, a rank she could only ever dream of, she must first be selected as a palace maid. For generations, this is how the dynasty has secured the future of the empire, by gathering the brightest and most beautiful girls from every corner of the land. And now, you are one of them. You are 14 when the selection officers arrive in your small village in Shanxi. The world has always been small to you. The dusty streets, the bustling market, the familiar faces of your neighbours. The only wealth your family has ever known is the silk they sell, a business that has been in your family for generations. But floods and bandits have taken everything, leaving you on the brink of starvation. You watch as your father, his shoulders slumped with a grief you can feel in your own bones, signs the papers that will save your family. The silver they offer is a small fortune, enough to buy food and security for your younger brothers. You can see the pain in his eyes, the impossible choice he had to make, and you accept it, not with anger, but with a quiet resolve. The day of the selection is a blur of anticipation and dread. You stand in a line with dozens of other girls, all of you dressed in your best clothes, your faces scrubbed clean. You are just one among many, a potential thread in the intricate tapestry of the imperial court. You can feel the eyes of the officials on you, cold and appraising. They examine your posture, test your ability to kneel for extended periods, and check for scars or blemishes. They are not looking at you, the girl from Shanxi, but at the raw materials for a life of service. You hold your breath as an official's gaze lingers on you. This one shows promise, he notes, his voice a low rumble. You try not to flinch as he inspects your hands, your fingers, the tools of your trade. Good breeding, intelligent eyes. She'll adapt well. The words are not a compliment, but a pronouncement, a judgment that seals your fate. The journey to Beijing is long and grueling, a 4-week trek across a vast and unfamiliar landscape. You are packed into an ox cart with 50 other girls, all of you silent and terrified. You can feel their despair like a physical weight in the air. The girls are between 12 and 17, each of them a sacrifice made by a family on the verge of ruin. They alternate between tears and despair. Their faces a mirror of the grief you know is in your father's heart. But you are different. You watch the world change around you, from the familiar Loess plateaus of your home to the rolling plains and bustling cities of the north. You memorize the names of the officials, the ones who seem to hold your fate in their hands. You listen to the clipped tones of their Manchu, the phrases they use when they think no one is listening. You learn what they mean. New cattle, good for the master, don't let them mix with the old ones. The words are a brutal lesson in your new reality. You are not a person, not anymore. You are a tool, a possession, and a resource to be exploited. Your resolve hardens with each passing day. You will not let them break you. You will not let them turn you into a weeping, despairing girl. Instead, you learn to become a shadow, a listener, a girl who can see without being seen. You learn to read the faces of the other girls, to see the hunger in their eyes, the desperate need for a friend, a kindred spirit. But you keep your distance, a careful barrier of silence and observation. You watch the girls who weep, the ones who cling to each other, the ones who rage against their fate, and you know, with a certainty that chills you, that they will not survive. This is not a journey to a new home. This is a journey to a battlefield, and you must learn to fight. The journey ends as a great wall of stone, and wood rises before you. The Forbidden City, the heart of the empire, looms on the horizon. The officers' bright yellow banners snap in the wind, a cruel and beautiful symbol of the power that now holds you in its grip. The gates open, and you are ushered inside, a small, insignificant figure in a sea of red and gold. The air is thick with the scent of incense and new beginnings. You are no longer the girl from the silk merchant's family. You are a palace maid, a small part of a vast machine. You know this is a dangerous and brutal world, one where a single misstep can mean a lifetime of misery or even death. But you also know this is a place of immense opportunity, a world where the smallest act can lead to a new destiny. You have no illusions about your purpose here. You are here to serve, to work, to survive. You are here because your father's love and desperation made an impossible choice. And as you stand on the cusp of this new world, you feel a new emotion, a strange and powerful mix of terror and excitement. You will not be the weeping, despairing girl. You will be the girl who adapts, the girl who learns, the girl who survives. You will become a part of the Forbidden City, a new player in an old game. Your story has just begun. The Forbidden City is not just a palace. It is a world unto itself, a living, breathing monument to absolute power. Its vastness dwarfs anything from your provincial upbringing. As you step through the gates, the sheer scale of it threatens to crush you. The vermilion walls stretch beyond sight, enclosing a labyrinth of courtyards and halls, whose golden roofs seem to touch heaven itself, glinting in the pale Beijing sun. The air is thick with the scent of incense, the distant murmur of thousands of voices, and the quiet tension of a place where every word and action is judged. You are assigned to the Palace of Prolonging Happiness, a quiet, almost forgotten corner of the vast complex, far from the central court. Your rank is the lowest possible for a palace servant, a 9th-rank palace maid, a shunu. Your title, so formal and elevated, is a cruel irony. You are not a lady-in-waiting, not a consort's companion. You are a cleaner, a polisher, a silent accessory to the lives of those who hold power. Your first and only duty is to maintain the elaborate tea ceremony implements used by the imperial consorts. Your existence becomes a careful dance of routine and fear. The days bleed into one another, marked by the cadence of temple bells that toll at 4 a.m., calling you from your rough straw mat to begin your labours. You spend hours polishing silver tea sets until they shine like mirrors, their ornate carvings glinting under the dim morning light. You arrange the delicate porcelain cups, each piece belonging to a specific rank in the intricate hierarchy of the imperial women. The jasmine blends, each one chosen to soothe or invigorate a different consort, must be prepared to perfection, the leaves steeped for a precise number of seconds. Every day is a test of your memory, your dexterity, and your resolve. One misplaced spoon, one incorrectly folded napkin, one moment of perceived disrespect towards the consorts you serve. Any of these infractions bring swift and brutal punishment. You have seen girls beaten for lesser offences, their cries muffled by the thick palace walls. You learn to move with a quiet efficiency, your eyes lowered, your movements precise. There is no room for error, no space for the girl you used to be. The palace hierarchy operates like a vast machine designed to crush individual identity, to strip you of everything you were and remold you into a cog in its intricate workings. And so you are stripped of your name. The girl from Shanxi is no longer your identity. You are forbidden your birth name, a rule that stings more than any physical punishment. You are given a new one, Mei Yun, beautiful cloud. It is a name as ethereal and forgettable as your assigned role. You are a beautiful cloud, transient and fleeting, a wisp of vapour that will eventually dissipate without a trace. You feel the final connection to your home and your family sever. You are no longer your father's daughter or your brother's sister. You are Mei-yun, a name that belongs to the palace. Survival becomes an art form, the art of useful invisibility. You learn to fade into the background, a silent shadow moving through the gilded halls. You learn to anticipate the needs of the consorts before they are spoken, to pour the tea before they have to ask, to polish the silver before it has a chance to tarnish. You are so good at it that the other maids begin to call you Little Shadow, a nickname you accept with a hollow indifference. You watch the other girls who fail at this art, the ones who laugh too loudly, who glance up at the consorts with defiant eyes, who walk with too much of a swagger. They are punished, transferred to harsher duties, or, in the worst cases, simply disappear. You learn from their mistakes. Years pass in this blur of routine and fear. The year 1845 bleeds into 1846, and then into 1847. You grow taller, your face losing its childlike softness. Your hands, once so steady at needlework, are now calloused from endless hours of polishing. The Forbidden City has become your entire world, its rhythms your heartbeat. You have become Mei-yun, a useful tool, a silent observer, a beautiful cloud drifting through a golden cage. And in this quiet, invisible life, you begin to see things others miss. You see the bitter rivalry between the consorts, the way they use you and the other maids as pawns in their silent wars. You see the fear in the eyes of the officials, the weight of their own tenuous positions. And you begin to understand that even in the highest ranks of the Qing court, no one is truly safe. This knowledge is your secret weapon. You have nothing but your invisibility, your observation, and your quiet resolve. It is enough for now. 3 years of service have transformed the girl you were into the woman you are now. You are no longer just a maid. You are an observer, a listener, and a shadow. You've learned that the Forbidden City operates on a currency far more valuable than silver or jade, information. A misplaced word can be a weapon, and a piece of forgotten gossip can save a life. You begin to see the palace not as a series of routines, but as a vast network of connections. A web you can learn to navigate. Your quiet efficiency and careful demeanour have earned you a reputation, and with it, a certain level of trust. You begin cultivating relationships with key figures, not with overt flattery, but with small, quiet acts of service. You bring extra tea leaves to the head eunuch, a man who controls staff assignments and knows every secret whispered in the halls. You leave a special tonic for the imperial physicians, a sweet herbal concoction that eases their exhaustion. They in turn begin to see you not as a disposable Junu, but as a useful asset. You listen to their casual conversations, the bits and pieces of information they exchange, and you piece them together like a puzzle. You learn which consorts are vying for the emperor's favour, which officials are plotting against each other, and which palace ladies have a fondness for a certain type of tea. Your true awakening comes through tragedy. When senior concubine Hua mysteriously dies, you feel a cold dread creep into your heart. The official story is that she died of natural causes, a fever that took her in the night. But you know better. You were there, invisible as always, and you saw things others missed. The unusual bitter scent in her chambers, a smell that reminded you of the poison your village elders warned you about. The way her fingernails had turned a subtle, almost imperceptible shade of blue. The fact that her personal maid, a girl named Bao Ju, had disappeared 3 days earlier. A girl whose entire family was dependent on the concubine's generosity. You go about your duties, your hands steady as you clean the concubine's tea set for the last time. Your mind, however, is a whirlwind of calculation. You don't share your observations. You don't whisper them to the other maids, or mention them to the head eunuch. You have learned that knowledge is power, but premature revelation is death. To expose the truth now would be to paint a target on your own back, to become a pawn in a game you are not yet ready to play. You quietly document every detail, a secret record kept in the back of your mind. The palace investigation concludes its findings in a few days. The officials nod and agree with the story of a natural death, and the matter is closed. But you know the truth. Concubine Hua was murdered. Someone wanted her dead, had access to her private chambers, and possessed knowledge of subtle, untraceable poisons. The realization transforms your worldview. The Forbidden City isn't just a gilded cage. It is a battlefield, a place where survival is determined not by beauty or rank, but by your ability to gather information and use it to your advantage. You see the silent wars playing out in the smallest details, a gift of a hairpin, a quiet conversation in a corridor, the subtle shift in a consort's expression. You are no longer a frightened girl from Shanxi. You are a player in the deadly game of the Forbidden City. You have nothing but your invisibility, your observation, and your quiet resolve. But this knowledge, this secret record of the truth, is a weapon more powerful than any sword. You know now that you must not only survive, but thrive. You must become a master of this game, a player who knows the rules and can exploit them for her own purposes. You are Mei Yun, a beautiful cloud, but you are a beautiful cloud with eyes that see everything. The summer of 1849 settles over the Forbidden City like a heavy blanket, a suffocating heat that clings to the vermilion walls and stifles the air. The humidity is relentless, and a fever begins to sweep through the palace maids. The staff quarters, already overcrowded, become a breeding ground for sickness. Girls who were healthy yesterday are too weak to stand today. The meticulous routines of the inner palace begin to fray as shortages of staff create gaps in the rigid schedule. Your quiet efficiency, honed over years of polishing and preparing, does not go unnoticed. You are one of the few maids who remain healthy. Your strength and resilience, an anomaly in the sickly halls. The head eunuch, desperate to fill the most critical positions, temporarily assigns you to serve in the Hall of Mental Cultivation, a place you've only ever glimpsed from afar. It is the emperor's private residence and his primary office, the very heart of the empire. To be assigned here is both a great honor and a source of immense fear, for a single misstep could lead to ruin. The hall is a world apart. The air is cooler, scented with the ink of freshly written decrees and the quiet perfume of aged wood. You move like a ghost through the gilded corridors, a silent witness to the most important affairs of state. One late night, as you are preparing a fresh pot of oolong tea, you find yourself in the same room as Emperor Daoguang himself. He is seated at a low table with his highest-ranking generals, their voices a cacophony of worry as they argue loudly about military tactics and the rising tide of rebel suppression. You focus on your task, your hands moving with the practiced grace of a calligrapher. Your fingers, once calloused from needlework, now possess a delicate precision that allows you to pour the hot water without a single tremble, to place each cup with a soft clink. The generals' voices rise and fall, a storm of anxiety and frustration. But you are a beautiful cloud, a still point in the chaos. Suddenly, a voice cuts through the din, not with anger, but with quiet observation. Your hands don't tremble, the emperor says, his gaze fixed on you. He ignores the agitated generals and watches you pour the tea. Fear makes most servants clumsy, but you maintain grace under pressure. The world seems to stop. The generals fall silent. You feel a cold wave of terror wash over you, a fear so profound it threatens to break your composure. You are a low-ranking maid, a mere shadow. To be addressed by the Son of Heaven is an unthinkable privilege and a terrifying risk. But in that moment, you know this is an opportunity you can't waste. You risk everything. "Tell me, girl," he says, his voice softer now, with a hint of true curiosity. "Where did you learn such discipline? You do not seem like the others." He watches you carefully, a faint smile on his lips. The silence in the room is suffocating. The generals wait, their eyes darting between you and the emperor. You feel their curiosity, their suspicion. Your mind races, but your body remains still. He leans forward slightly. "Speak. I am not a monster. A calm spirit is a rare thing in this place." You raise your head just enough to meet his eyes, your gaze steady and respectful, but not subservient. "Your Majesty's wisdom creates calm in chaos," you reply, your voice steady, a whisper that somehow carries in the sudden silence. "Serving such leadership brings peace, not fear." The flattery is calculated, a phrase you've heard spoken by courtiers, but which you now deliver with a sincerity that surprises even yourself. Your steady voice impresses him more than your words. He nods, his eyes filled with a new kind of curiosity. He is not used to such calm confidence from a palace maid. "What family name did you carry before the palace?" he asks. This is the ultimate test. The truth is your weakness. The truth would place you back among the disposable, the forgettable. The truth would make you a peasant girl from Shanxi. You hesitate for a split second. Then the name you've heard whispered by the consorts, the name of a powerful and prestigious Manchu clan, comes to your lips. You meet his gaze, your eyes clear. "Yehenara, your Majesty," you lee smoothly. "My family has served the dynasty for generations." A flicker of recognition crosses his face. The name is a known quantity, a lineage of power. He does not question your claim. He simply nods again, a brief dismissal. Within days, your lie is confirmed. You are officially promoted to 7th rank female attendant, a rank that elevates you above all the other Shunu and gives you access to the inner palace. The remote possibility of imperial favour is no longer a distant dream, but a new reality. The game has changed, and you have, for the first time, played a winning hand. Your promotion to 7th rank female attendant changes your existence in the Forbidden City completely. You are no longer just a maid in the Palace of Prolonging Happiness. You are now a trusted servant with access to Emperor Daoguang's private chambers in the Hall of Mental Cultivation. This is the inner sanctum, a place of immense power and quiet desperation. You no longer spend your days polishing silver or arranging tea sets. Instead, your new duties are to be a quiet, watchful presence, to anticipate his needs before he asks, and to prepare his favourite teas during his late-night work sessions. As you spend more time in his company, you begin to see the emperor not as a distant, godlike figure, but as a man burdened by impossible choices. The golden robes and the dragon-embroidered silks cannot hide the weariness in his eyes. You overhear his confidential meetings, a steady stream of grim news and frustrating reports. The aftermath of the First Opium War has left the dynasty reeling, its authority weakened and its treasury drained. You hear his generals and ministers speak of a crumbling empire, of treasury revenues declining as corruption spreads through provincial administrations like a plague. You witness him agonizing over reports of natural disasters, floods and famines that strain the relief systems and leave millions starving. He is a man fighting a losing battle, and the weight of a collapsing empire rests heavily on his shoulders. Unlike the other palace women, who focus solely on attracting imperial attention through physical beauty, ornate clothing, or shallow entertainment, you realize your path to survival and influence must be different. You already have his attention. Now, you must earn his respect. You know your unique value lies in your mind, in the quiet observations you've made over the years. You position yourself not as a concubine in waiting, but as a knowledgeable listener. During his evening tea, you offer small, calculated insights. You don't speak unless spoken to, but when he asks a question, your answers are surprisingly well informed. When he laments the widespread corruption, you speak of your merchant family's past, of the challenges they faced from greedy officials who demanded bribes and extorted taxes. When he ponders the difficulties of distributing aid to the provinces, you offer a different perspective, not of military tactics, but of the human struggle, the desperate families, the crumbling infrastructure, the local rivalries that hinder honest work. You learned all this on your journey to Beijing, from listening to the officials and your fellow maids. You share this knowledge not as a woman trying to impress, but as someone who understands the complexities of the world outside the palace walls. But your most effective tool is not the information you offer, but the questions you ask. They are always thoughtful, carefully worded, and designed to help him clarify his own thinking. When he expresses frustration with his generals, you might ask, does a leader's true strength lie in a swift strike or in a patient understanding of their enemy? You never offer a solution, only a new way of looking at the problem. You become a sounding board, a quiet mirror in which he can see his own thoughts reflected back at him. One evening, after a particularly long and tense meeting with his ministers, he sets his teacup down with a sigh. He looks at you, his eyes filled with a weariness that you have come to recognize. Most women in this palace want jewelry or titles, he confides. The words a quiet lament. They offer only distractions. You seem to want understanding. That's refreshing. Your heart pounds in your chest, but you maintain your quiet demeanor. This servant wishes only for His Majesty's peace of mind, you reply, bowing your head respectfully. You know that to show too much ambition is to invite suspicion. Your strategy pays off. Dao Guang selects you for more frequent private audiences, a sign of his growing trust. He values your conversation, your quiet intellect, and the sense of calm you bring to his tumultuous life. You remain careful to never presume upon his attention, treating each conversation not as a step toward power, but as a privilege to be cherished. Each exchange is an investment in building trust and demonstrating your unique value beyond physical attraction. You are not just a palace maid anymore. You are a confidant, a quiet ally to the one man who holds the fate of the dynasty in his hands. You have begun to play a different game entirely. The Forbidden City fell into a deep and mournful silence the moment the news arrived. Emperor Dao Guang was dead. The date was the 25th of February, 1850. For you, the death of a monarch was not a historical event to be read about in books, but a terrifying reality that transformed your world overnight. Your survival, your influence, your very life had been built on a foundation of trust with the previous emperor. With his last breath, that foundation crumbled to dust. The palace, once a place of tense but predictable routine, was now a vortex of uncertainty. The formal mourning period was a solemn procession of rituals and incense. But beneath the surface, a brutal new reality was taking shape. Old loyalties were being tested, and new alliances were being forged. You were a maid, an attendant, a confidant, but your relationship with Dao Guang meant nothing to his successor. The new emperor, Shanfeng, was his fourth son, a young man who knew nothing of the quiet maid who had listened to his father's woes. You could be dismissed, sent back to the most menial labour, or, a more chilling thought, eliminated as a potential security risk. An intimate with the previous emperor, held too many secrets, knew too much about the court's vulnerabilities. The loyalty you had earned was a liability in the eyes of a new ruler. But your survival had never depended on luck. It had always been a matter of careful preparation. While Dao Guang had been in his final ailing months, you had not simply watched him weaken. You had also watched the new court forming around the crown prince. You had quietly cultivated relationships with key palace staff who would serve the new emperor, the ambitious young eunuchs in his retinue, the personal attendants who knew his habits, the cooks who had learned his favourite dishes. These were small, seemingly insignificant acts of kindness and trust that were now your lifeline. More crucially, you had studied the new emperor's character from afar, piecing together his preferences, his interests, and the political pressures he would soon face. You knew he was less patient than his father, more impulsive, and more focused on the military and statecraft than on personal conversation. You learned his favourite military strategies, his preferred historical texts, and the names of the scholars he most respected. This knowledge was your secret armour. When Shanfeng began the arduous task of reviewing the palace staff he'd inherited, the inspection was a tense, brutal affair. Dozens of maids were dismissed, their families' noble names no match for the new emperor's desire for efficiency and loyalty. You watched as girls who had served for years were quietly led away, their fate a grim warning. You positioned yourself strategically, standing straight with a dignified bearing that set you apart from the trembling girls around you. Your eyes, as always, were on the new emperor, not in fear, but in observation. You noticed the lines of stress around his eyes, the way he rubbed his temples as if a headache were already forming. You saw a man trying to project power while grappling with the overwhelming weight of the throne. As he moved down the line, his gaze swept over you, a fleeting moment of inspection. He paused, his eyes lingering for a second, longer than on the others. At the same moment, one of the loyal eunuchs you'd befriended, a man named Li Feng, stepped forward slightly. "This one, Your Majesty," he said in a low, respectful voice, "is unparalleled. She served the late emperor with flawless skill and has a mind for matters beyond the usual domestic duties. Her ability to keep a still hand, even amidst the most heated debates, is an asset to any court." It was a moment of perfect timing and execution, a culmination of months of quiet work. The subtle recommendation was not a whisper, but a statement of value. The next day, a new decree was issued. You were not dismissed. You were retained and promoted to fifth-rank female attendant in the new imperial household. The promotion was a stunning triumph, a move that solidified your position and gave you even greater access to the inner palace. The transition had taught you a crucial and unforgiving lesson. In palace politics, survival requires constant adaptation and the ability to prove your value to each new power holder. Your worth was not in your past, but in your ability to be useful in the present. You had not survived the transition by accident. You had planned for it, and now you were ready for the next move. The Forbidden City is an island of perceived order in a sea of rising chaos. Under Emperor Shanfeng's rule, the empire's troubles, once a distant rumour, now pound at the palace gates. In the south, a new and dangerous threat emerges. The Taiping Rebellion, a mass movement led by Hong Xiuquan, a man who claims to be the brother of Jesus Christ. His fanatical followers sweep across the countryside, their numbers growing by the day, challenging the very legitimacy of the Qing dynasty. As if that wasn't enough, Western powers, with their superior ships and weapons, press for additional trading concessions, demanding more ports and more access to a reluctant China. To make matters worse, the internal decay of the empire accelerates. Corruption, like a rampant weed, undermines tax collection and military effectiveness, leaving the dynasty's coffers empty and its armies weak. In this climate of fear and uncertainty, the beautiful concubines and elegant court ladies, who relied on their looks and charm, find their influence waning. Emperor Shanfeng has no time for idle flirtation or elaborate entertainment. He is a man under siege, and what he needs is not beauty, but a clear head. This is where your intelligence network, your years of silent observation, and strategic relationship building becomes invaluable. You prove your worth not through beauty or seduction, but through information and analysis. Your merchant family background, once a source of shame and a lie you had to cover, is now a unique asset. While court-educated officials struggle to understand the economic turmoil of the provinces, you see the patterns. You understand that a drop in silk prices in one province will lead to a rise in peasant unrest in another. You can see the logic behind the collapse of the salt trade and how it impacts local revenues. This practical knowledge, a stark contrast to the theoretical wisdom of the court, gives you a perspective that no one else possesses. You continue to cultivate your network, your web of quiet influence spreading through every corner of the Forbidden City. The eunuchs you befriended, the servants in the kitchens, the minor officials who pass through the hall of mental cultivation, they are your eyes and ears. They provide you with whispered insights about provincial conditions, the actual, on-the-ground reality of the rebel movements, and the activities of the foreign merchants in the port cities. You gather these tidbits of information, filtering them, cross-referencing them, and distilling them into a clear, accurate picture of the world outside the palace walls. One evening, you are serving the emperor his tea as he pores over a stack of contradictory reports from his officials. He is visibly frustrated, his hand rubbing his temples in a gesture you have come to recognize. This report says the rebels in Guangxi are weak, a mere rabble, he says, throwing a scroll onto the table. This one claims they have the strength of 100,000 and are marching north. Who do I trust? You take a deep breath, your voice soft and steady. Your Majesty, you begin. The reports may not be contradictory, but merely reflecting different truths. The first report comes from a general who needs more resources. The second comes from a governor who is afraid of being blamed for his own lack of control. But a eunuch from Guangxi recently spoke with a food supplier who said the price of grain has tripled, not because of a bad harvest, but because the Taiping army is conscripting all the local men and their crops. The emperor stops rubbing his temples and looks at you, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He is not used to such a direct and logical analysis of the situation. You continue, explaining how you synthesized information from multiple palace sources, from a servant who overheard a conversation with a foreign merchant to a minor official who was dismissed for questioning a report's accuracy. You connect the dots for him, revealing a pattern of intentional misinformation and fear. Your synthesis of the information proves accurate. When he sends a new, trusted official to Guangxi, the report that comes back confirms your suspicions. The rebels are far stronger than the generals have let on, but not as strong as the governor has claimed. With your insights, Shanfeng makes better, more strategic decisions. He can see the truth now, and he knows it came from you. You have a merchant's eye for details others miss, he acknowledges one evening. A rare compliment that feels more valuable than any title or jewel. You see the world as it is, not as they wish it to be. This intellectual partnership, built not on physical attraction, but on mutual respect and shared purpose, forms the foundation of your growing influence. You are not a concubine to be admired, or a wife to be cherished. You are a confidant, a strategic advisor, a unique and invaluable asset to the emperor. This is your path to power, a quieter, more dangerous, and far more rewarding path than the ones taken by the women who now watch your rise with bitter envy. You have moved beyond the game of survival and are now playing for the highest stakes of all. Your calculated patience culminates in a moment of quiet, terrifying realization. After weeks of subtle signs, the truth becomes undeniable. Your monthly bleeding has stopped. The news is a shock that reverberates through the quiet halls of your mind. For a palace woman, a pregnancy is the ultimate gamble, a turn of fate that can either lead to an unimaginable rise in status or a permanent descent into obscurity. Success could elevate you to the highest ranks of the palace hierarchy, while failure, a miscarriage, a stillbirth, or, worst of all, bearing a daughter could result in permanent marginalization and the end of all the influence you have painstakingly built. The news transforms your status immediately. Emperor Shanfeng, hearing of the potential heir, elevates you to noble lady. The title comes with a swift, almost jarring change in your existence. You are granted your own private courtyard, a beautiful, quiet space away from the prying eyes of the main palace. You have your own personal servants, no longer just a small disposable shadow. The promotion is an immediate shield, a protective layer against the rivals who now see you as a threat. But it is also a spotlight, and every move you make is now scrutinized. Pregnancy in the Forbidden City is not a gentle journey. It is a war fought in silence. The threat of poison is constant. Every meal becomes suspect, and you find yourself tasting each dish with a new level of caution, your senses heightened by a constant, low-level fear. Every servant is now a potential assassin, a pawn in another consort's game. Every rival consort is no longer just a figure to be observed, but a mortal enemy who would not hesitate to see your pregnancy end in tragedy. You understand that this is the ultimate test of your strategic mind. You must not only survive, but also protect a fragile life, a life that holds your entire future in its small, developing hands. You spend the next 9 months in a state of hyper-awareness, a constant vigilance that never wavers. You do not leave your survival to chance. You begin to build new alliances, a network of protection that is separate from your intelligence sources. You cultivate relationships with the palace physicians, not through flattery, but through genuine curiosity and a clear, pragmatic understanding of their work. You ask them about their methods, their preferred herbs, and the history of prenatal care in the palace. You subtly offer them information you've gathered on the court's rivalries, making them see you as an invaluable ally rather than just another patient. In return, they provide you with specialized prenatal care, and more importantly, they become your first line of defense against any attempts on your life or your child's. You also study. You spend hours in the palace library, reading ancient texts on prenatal care, on the health of mother and child, on the historical precedents for succession politics. You are a student once more, but this time the stakes are everything. You continue to gather intelligence about the court's factions, the growing influence of certain ministers, and the subtle shifts in power. You know that if your child is male, he could become emperor. If female, your influence ends. Everything depends on chance and careful preparation. You are a merchant calculating the ultimate risk, a scholar studying for the final exam of your life, a soldier preparing for the final battle. Your labor begins in the quiet of the night, a silent fire that consumes you. For 26 excruciating hours, the pain is a primal force that pushes you to the very brink of your endurance. You do not cry out. You do not scream. You bear the agony with the same quiet dignity you have cultivated for years, the same strength that helped you survive the journey to Beijing and the years of anonymity. Your mind, even in the midst of the agony, is a fortress, and you focus on the single most important goal, delivering a healthy son. The midwives, their faces grim and professional, marvel at your stoicism. They have never seen a woman endure such a long labour without a single cry. Then a moment of release, a gasp, a cry. A new sound fills the room, a sound more beautiful than any music you have ever heard. A son. You deliver a healthy son. The moment Prince Zaicheng draws his first breath, your entire world changes. You are no longer just a noble lady. You have achieved the title that transforms everything. Imperial Consort. You are now a mother to a potential emperor, and according to Qing law, a possible regent if your son inherits the throne during a minority. The quiet, invisible girl from Shaanxi, the forgotten Zhunu, is now one of the most powerful women in the Forbidden City. You have moved beyond survival and are now a player at the highest level of the game. The birth of your son, Prince Zaicheng, elevates you to the rank of Imperial Consort. But with this new status comes a terrifying new reality. Raising an imperial prince in the Forbidden City requires navigating assassination attempts, succession politics, and court intrigue that would challenge even the most experienced diplomats. Your son's existence, a physical symbol of the dynasty's future, threatens the empress, who remains childless, and every other consort who dreams of bearing the future emperor. You are no longer just fighting for your own survival. You are fighting for the survival of your child, the one person in this vast cold palace whom you truly love. The first attempt on your son's life comes when he is just 6 months old. He is a beautiful, healthy baby, a source of light and joy in your isolated world. But one afternoon, after his feeding, he becomes violently ill. His skin turns clammy, his cries become weak and hoarse, and his small body begins to convulse. You watch in horror as the palace physicians rush to his side, their faces a mask of grim professionalism. You know, with the cold certainty of a strategist, that this is not a natural illness. An immediate investigation reveals that the poison was in his wet nurse's milk. You fire the nurse immediately, but you know she is just a pawn. Your own investigation, conducted with the quiet help of your network of loyal eunuchs and servants, reveals the plot originated from supporters of another consort, a woman whose influence had been steadily declining since your pregnancy was announced. You could expose her, but you know that proving it without disrupting palace stability requires delicate maneuvering. A direct accusation could lead to a scandal that would implicate many others and could make you seem like an opportunistic troublemaker. Instead, you respond with a new, meticulously planned strategy of protection. The attempts on your life begin in earnest as well. A few months after your son's poisoning, you find yourself dizzy and weak, collapsing in your courtyard. The imperial physicians quickly discover a slow-acting poison in your tea, a subtle, scentless toxin that would have gradually weakened you and your ability to care for your son. The discovery sends a shiver through you. You are not immune, and the enemies who fear your son are willing to strike at you directly. The incident forces you to expand your security network to include yourself, trusting only a small circle of loyal servants to handle your food and drink. Your vigilance is tested again when your son is 4 years old. During a ceremonial procession for the emperor's birthday, A small, ornamental tile suddenly falls from a rooftop, narrowly missing your son's head. It shatters on the ground, a few inches from his foot. The official explanation is a loose tile from a recent repair, but your spies confirm it was carefully placed, loosened in a way that would have made the tile fall at the precise moment your son passed underneath. It was a clear, brutal warning, a reminder that they were watching, waiting for a chance to strike. You respond by building an unprecedented security network around your son. It is a system designed to be impenetrable, a fortress of trust and vigilance. You arrange for a rotation of trusted eunuchs to taste all of your son's food, from his milk to his ceremonial rice porridge, before it is prepared and given to him. You install a rotating system of guards, ensuring that no single person controls access to his chambers. You establish a coded communication system with your most loyal servants, a network of whispers and subtle gestures that allows you to coordinate protective measures without alerting potential enemies. The cost of this new security system is enormous, but you do not care. Nothing is more valuable than your son's life. As the years pass, your vigilance pays off. Your son, despite the constant threats, survives and thrives. His laughter fills your courtyard, his presence a source of hope for both you and the emperor. Your son's survival and healthy development gradually convince court officials that he represents the dynasty's future. He is not just a boy. He is a symbol of stability and continuity in a time of great turmoil. By age 5, he is receiving formal education from imperial tutors and participating in ceremonial functions that establish his position in the succession hierarchy. You watch him from a distance, a proud and protective mother, and you know that your work is not done. This is not the end of the game. It is just a new, more dangerous level. The year 1860 was a season of profound grief and national humiliation for the Qing dynasty. The foreign forces of the Anglo-French expedition had marched on Beijing itself, a violation of the imperial heartland that was unthinkable to even the most pessimistic of officials. In a final act of desecration, they had burned the Summer Palace, a magnificent architectural masterpiece and a symbol of imperial majesty. Emperor Shanfeng, in his deep shame and distress, had fled to the summer hunting lodge in Jehol. The military defeats mounted, and the Taiping rebellion continued draining imperial resources, a festering wound that refused to heal. The weight of these failures was more than any man could bear, and the emperor sought solace in a destructive spiral of despair. His reliance on alcohol and opium accelerated his physical decline, turning the once vigorous ruler into a gaunt, sickly figure. As Xianfeng weakened, you did not distance yourself, as many others did. Instead, you drew closer, assuming increasing responsibility for the administrative decisions that were being abandoned or mishandled. His ministers, terrified and incompetent, offered him false reports of victory and stability, but he no longer believed them. He had you. Your merchant background, once a source of scorn for the palace nobility, now proved invaluable. When he agonized over the collapse of the treasury, you could explain the economic policies in a way that his officials could not, tracing the flow of revenue from the provinces to the court and pointing out the specific points where corruption was siphoning off funds. You could speak with him in a clear, pragmatic voice about the need to prioritize military expenditures over lavish court spending, a message his ministers were too afraid to deliver. Your intelligence network, cultivated for years in the shadows, provided accurate information that official reports often distorted or concealed. When the emperor needed to know the true strength of the rebel armies in the south, you could provide a clear estimate, not based on biased military reports, but on the whispers of travelling merchants and the coded messages of your loyal eunuchs. You became his eyes and ears in a world that was trying its best to blind and deceive him. Your presence was a source of calm in the chaos, a pillar of strength as his health failed. He had long since stopped seeing you as a mere consort. You were his most trusted advisor, his confidant, the only person who offered him the truth. In the final months of his life, his reliance on you was absolute. He would dismiss his ministers and generals, but he would keep you at his side, listening to you read reports or simply talking with you about the future of the dynasty. He trusted your counsel more than anyone else's. Your strategy of intellectual partnership, which had begun as a means of survival, had become a lifeline for a dying emperor. When Emperor Shanfeng died in August 1861, the Forbidden City mourned, but you felt no sadness, only a cold, terrifying understanding of what came next. Your 9-year-old son, Prince Zaicheng, was now emperor. He was a child, a boy who had known only the sheltered life of the Forbidden City. His first breath in the world had given you the title of imperial consort, but his father's last breath elevated you to the pinnacle of female power in imperial China. You, the girl from Shanxi, had become Empress Dowager. Your rise was one of the most dramatic social ascensions in Chinese history, a testament to your quiet intelligence and iron will. But your new title did not come without its conditions. As his final act, Shanfeng's death decree established 8 regents to govern during your son's minority. They were a powerful and ambitious group of ministers and princes, all of whom saw your title as a ceremonial one and your role as a mere figurehead. They believed that they, and they alone, would hold the reins of power. The stage was set for a political confrontation that would determine whether you truly controlled imperial power or whether you would be relegated to the shadows once more. Your long journey from palace maid to Empress Dowager had prepared you for this moment. The game had just begun. The emperor's death decree was a final, calculated move on a chessboard. It named 8 regents, a council of powerful ministers and princes, to govern during your son's minority. They were men of immense ambition and influence, and they saw you, the imperial consort, as merely the emperor's mother, a ceremonial figurehead with no right to the reins of power. They attempted to marginalize you completely, dismissing your counsel, ignoring your concerns, and moving to secure their own positions of authority. They did not see the quiet mind that had outlasted emperors and outmaneuvered consorts. They underestimated both your political cunning and the network of allies you had cultivated throughout 15 years of palace service. You were not alone. Your key ally was Prince Gong, Emperor Shanfeng's younger brother. He was a man of keen intellect and a deep love for the dynasty, and he too was horrified by the regent's incompetence and arrogance. He watched as they bungled military decisions and enriched themselves through corruption, and he understood that their rule would lead to the dynasty's ruin. Your secret meetings were held in the dead of night, away from prying eyes, in a secluded hall of the Forbidden City. There, you and Prince Gong forged a silent alliance, bound by a shared fear and a common purpose. You brought to the table your invaluable intelligence network, your understanding of the palace's inner workings, and your direct access to the new child emperor. He brought his military power, his political influence, and the loyalty of a faction of Manchu nobles who also feared the regent's recklessness. Together, you began to engineer a counter-coup, a high-stakes gamble that would either secure your power or cost you your life. The plan was meticulous, a symphony of timing and absolute secrecy. It came to be known as the Xinyu coup. The opportunity arose as the imperial funeral procession began the solemn journey from the summer hunting lodge in Jehol back to the Forbidden City in Beijing. The regents, in a show of force, insisted on travelling alongside the late emperor's coffin. You, however, had a different plan. You argued that it was more fitting for the new emperor and his mother to travel ahead, returning to the palace to prepare for the return of the late emperor's body. The regents, blinded by their arrogance, saw this as a minor act of deference and agreed to your request, unknowingly splitting their forces and leaving themselves vulnerable. You and your son, along with a small, trusted retinue, travelled ahead in a separate caravan. The journey was a tense blur of coded messages and furtive glances. Your coded communication systems, once used to protect your son from assassins, were now used to coordinate with Prince Gong and his loyal forces in Beijing. Every whisper, every gesture, every scroll of parchment was a piece of a dangerous puzzle, a silent orchestration that would either lead to victory or to your demise. The regents, believing themselves to be in control, continued their slow, grand procession, unaware that their fate was sealed. The coup was executed with ruthless efficiency on the 2nd of November, 1861. As the regents' procession approached the gates of Beijing, they were met not by an honour guard, but by imperial guards, loyal to Prince Gong. The arrests were swift and decisive, a shocking, sudden end to their reign. The bewildered regents were charged with a litany of crimes: corruption, dereliction of duty, and treason. The news, when it reached the Forbidden City, was met with a mixture of disbelief and quiet relief. The coup was a masterstroke of political timing, a bold move that caught your enemies completely by surprise. Within hours, you had established yourself as sole regent, wielding absolute authority in your son's name. The palace maid, who had once polished tea sets and swept floors, now controlled the vast Qing Empire. Your rise from the lowest rank of servant to the supreme ruler of a dynasty was one of the most dramatic social ascensions in Chinese history. You had not won by chance, but by a lifetime of preparation. The transformation was complete, but consolidating your power required eliminating the remaining threats. The 8 regents were not a united front in prison. You separated them, isolating them from their remaining followers. 3 of the most powerful regents were executed for their crimes. The others, those who were less of a threat, faced exile or permanent house arrest. Your message to potential rivals was clear and unforgiving. Challenge the Empress Dowager at your own risk. The new era of the Qing dynasty had begun, and its ruler was a woman who had learned the game of power from the shadows. The coup of 1861 had secured your political position, but it did not, and could not, solve the problems plaguing the Qing dynasty. Ruling China during the late Qing period meant navigating a sea of impossible contradictions. Traditional scholars and old guard officials demanded strict adherence to Confucian principles, insisting that the only path to stability was a return to ancient customs and a rejection of all things foreign. At the same time, Western powers forced modernization through military superiority, using gunboat diplomacy to open new ports and demand new concessions. The empire was caught between a glorious past and a terrifying future, and you, the Empress Dowager, were forced to find a path through the storm. Your first priority was to end the Taiping Rebellion. The war had raged for a decade, draining imperial resources and leaving millions dead. You supported the military campaigns with the full force of the imperial treasury, but as a result, the military campaigns bankrupted the treasury. You had to find a way to finance the war without destroying the economy. You turned to your old networks, your merchant's eye for detail, and your understanding of economics. You streamlined tax collection, rooted out corrupt officials, and sought new sources of revenue. You understood that reform is necessary for survival, but change threatens the very system that legitimizes your authority. To change too much was to betray the memory of the emperors who had come before you. To change too little was to invite the complete collapse of the dynasty. Your approach was a delicate balance of pragmatic adaptation and careful preservation of imperial dignity. You threw your support behind the self-strengthening movement, a new political and military initiative that aimed to adopt Western technology while maintaining traditional Confucian governmental structures. Under your guidance, the Qing dynasty began to change in ways that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. Railways and telegraph lines began to connect distant provinces, modernizing communication and transportation, and binding the fragmented empire together. Modern arsenals produced better weapons and trained new generations of soldiers, giving the dynasty a fighting chance against both internal rebellion and foreign aggression. You also sent selected students to study abroad for technical knowledge, a radical move that promised to create a new class of enlightened officials who could lead the dynasty into the future. But modernization created new problems. The railways that connected the empire also carried Western ideas about government that challenged traditional authority. The educated Chinese increasingly questioned imperial legitimacy, and their loyalty to the dynasty began to waver. Economic development, driven by foreign trade, disproportionately benefited the coastal regions, while the inland areas stagnated, a stark contrast that deepened social unrest. You were a woman trying to fix an empire that was slowly but surely coming apart at the seams. All the while, your son, Emperor Tongji, grew up under your shadow. He was a boy emperor, a child who had inherited a title but not the power that came with it. You loved him, but you ruled for him, and as a result, he was never truly a ruler despite reaching adulthood. He was a boy torn between the traditional life of a sheltered prince and the difficult reality of a collapsing empire. As he entered his late teens, the weight of his powerless existence became unbearable. He began to rebel, seeking refuge in the distractions of the city, in the brothels and the clandestine haunts that offered him a freedom he could never find in his gilded cage. His final days were a grim and tragic affair. Officially, the court announced he was suffering from smallpox, a plague that had haunted the royal family for centuries. But the whispers in the Forbidden City told a different story. They spoke of a life of dissipation, of a body ravaged by something far more ignominious than a historical disease. You, the Empress Dowager, watched over him, the boy who had been the reason for your every move, every gamble. You saw the gaunt face, the feverish eyes, the slow, agonizing decline. This was not a death in battle or from a political assassination. It was a slow suicide born of despair. When he finally drew his last breath at just 19, the court saw only the political implications. The ministers saw a vacuum of power. The consorts saw a new opportunity. But you felt a searing, private pain that no one else could understand. He was your son, the one person you had protected above all others, the one life you had built your entire reign around. A deep, cold sorrow settled in your heart, a grief so profound it threatened to crack your carefully constructed facade. A part of you wondered if your unrelenting control had driven him to his own destruction. Had your ambition cost you the one thing you truly cared for? But the palace offered no time for mourning. The sorrow was a luxury you could not afford. Even as the funeral rites were being arranged, the whispers of a new succession crisis began. You had worked tirelessly to secure your son's throne, but now that he was gone, you had to find a new heir and prove your worth to the court once more. The game, it seemed, was never truly over. The death of Emperor Tongji plunged the Forbidden City into a maelstrom of political intrigue. The court was in a state of chaos, with ambitious ministers and princes vying for power. The most pressing question, the one that would determine the fate of the dynasty, was that of succession. The traditional rule was clear. A male heir of the next generation must be chosen from a close branch of the imperial family. The most immediate candidate was the son of Emperor Tongji's widow, should she bear one. But that option was a risk, and it was a risk you were not willing to take. You had secured your position through your son. You would not allow another woman to threaten your power, not even his widow. Instead of allowing Tongji's young widow to potentially bear a posthumous heir who would complicate succession, you made a controversial and ultimately defining decision. You installed your 3-year-old nephew Zaishan as the new emperor. This controversial move, which violated the strict rules of succession by placing a boy from the next generation, but of the same family line as the previous emperor, was a political masterstroke. It cemented your control over the dynasty for another generation, as you would continue ruling as regent for your adopted son, who would come to be known as Emperor Guangxu. The decision created lasting resentment among court factions who viewed your actions as a blatant violation of sacred succession law. The traditionalists, led by the conservative ministers who still clung to the old ways, whispered in the halls of the Forbidden City, calling your actions a power grab. They feared your ambition, your pragmatism, and your willingness to break with tradition. But their opposition was futile. Your political network, honed over 2 decades of palace life, was vast and unyielding. The biggest difficulty in this plan was the sheer audacity of it. You were violating centuries of tradition, a move that could have been seen as an act of treason. The obstacle was not just the regents you had so recently eliminated, but the very foundation of the Qing dynasty itself. To overcome this, you worked in secret. You gathered a small, trusted circle of allies, including Prince Gong, your longtime collaborator. You also used your intelligence network to gauge the mood of the court, learning which factions were loyal to tradition and which were open to a new way forward. The solution was to act with speed and ruthlessness, giving your enemies no time to organize. The moment Tongji died, you summoned a grand council of ministers. You arrived with your new emperor, a small boy in the arms of a trusted eunuch. Before anyone could object or propose another solution, you delivered your decree. You announced that, in accordance with the wishes of the late emperor, and in order to ensure the stability of the dynasty, your nephew would be the new emperor. The shock and speed of your actions, combined with the presence of your loyal allies, gave the ministers no time to object. Your control over the palace guards, the very men who had executed the coup of 1861, was absolute. You had learned that absolute power requires an absolute willingness to use it, and you did so without hesitation. Your enemies were silenced, their whispers turning into a grudging, resentful silence. The regency, during Guangxu's minority, transformed China more dramatically than any previous period. You threw your full weight behind the self-strengthening movement, pushing for a level of modernization that went far beyond what had been implemented under your son's short reign. You knew that China could not survive by clinging to the past. The military was modernized with Western weapons and training, their discipline and effectiveness increasing with each passing year. Education reforms introduced scientific subjects alongside classical studies, creating a new class of scholars who understood the world beyond China's borders. And in the coastal cities, industrial development created new economic opportunities, with factories and shipyards changing the face of the nation. Yet, this modernization, while necessary for survival, also strengthened forces that would ultimately threaten imperial authority. The students you had sent to study abroad returned with Western ideas about government and society, that directly challenged the very foundation of the Qing dynasty. The educated Chinese increasingly embraced republican ideas and called for an end to imperial rule. The regional governors you had empowered to modernize their provinces began to build independent power bases, loyal to themselves rather than to the central government in Beijing. And foreign influence, once confined to a few port cities, now penetrated Chinese society more deeply than ever before. Your new son, Guangxu, grew up under your shadow, much as his predecessor had. You were his mother and his ruler, and he could not escape your influence. He was a bright and sensitive boy, but he was never truly allowed to rule. And as he grew into a young man, a quiet rebellion began to simmer beneath his placid exterior. The throne was his by right, but the power was yours by will. His existence was a constant reminder of your political dominance, and it was a dynamic that would eventually lead to a new crisis. A new conflict that would test your political survival skills yet again. The long, silent game of power continued, a testament to your quiet will and the unyielding forces of history. The year 1900 was a year of reckoning. The Boxer Rebellion, a popular anti-foreign, anti-Christian movement, had swept across northern China. They were a peasant army, filled with righteous rage against the foreign powers that had humiliated China for half a century. At first, you saw them as an opportunity, a way to channel the popular anti-foreign sentiment while maintaining imperial legitimacy. Supporting the Boxers against foreign influence initially seemed like a brilliant strategy, a way to reclaim a measure of national pride and assert China's strength without directly engaging in a war that you knew the dynasty could not win. You secretly supplied the Boxers with weapons and ordered your imperial armies not to interfere with their march on Beijing. You had hoped that they would scare the foreign powers away, or at least force them to the negotiating table. But the Boxers were a storm you could not control. Their fanaticism was a force of nature, and their violence against foreigners, missionaries, and Chinese converts was a brutal reminder of the raw, untamed power of the Chinese people. The foreign powers, enraged by the attacks on their citizens and embassies, formed an 8-nation alliance and mounted a full-scale invasion. The military might of the foreign powers was overwhelming. They marched on Beijing, and their armies were a force of precision and technology that your traditional military forces could not match. The imperial court, in a final act of humiliation, was forced to flee the Forbidden City. The flight from Beijing was a nightmare, a panicked retreat of imperial carriages and a small army of loyal guards. You, the Empress Dowager, who had ruled from the centre of the world, were now a refugee in your own country. The experience was a brutal confrontation with the limits of traditional governance in the modern world. Your political cunning, your intelligence network, your years of strategic manoeuvring, none of it could stop a single Western cannon. The subsequent peace negotiations were even more humiliating. The Boxer Protocol, signed in 1901, required massive indemnity payments that crippled imperial finances for decades to come. The foreign powers also forced additional concessions, demanding more control over China's economy and society. The loss of face was complete, and the legitimacy of the Qing dynasty was shattered perhaps beyond repair. Your final years were spent attempting to stave off the inevitable. You, the woman who had risen to power by manipulating a centuries-old system of imperial hierarchy, now attempted to dismantle it from within. You issued decrees calling for constitutional reforms, a radical move that promised to transform the ancient monarchy into a constitutional one. You ordered a reorganization of the government, sent ministers abroad to study foreign systems, and even allowed women to be educated. The irony wasn't lost on you. The palace maid who rose through traditional hierarchy now oversaw the dismantling of the very system that enabled her ascension. You had been a master of the old game, but the new one required a set of rules that you were still learning. As you prepared for your death in 1908, a profound sense of melancholy settled over you. Your long life, filled with incredible triumphs and brutal losses, was coming to an end. You had risen from an anonymous merchant's daughter to one of history's most powerful rulers, but your greatest victory had been the preservation of the dynasty, and even that was a temporary, fragile thing. You had reached the pinnacle of power, only to watch it crumble in your hands. This melancholy was a quiet, internal despair that few would ever see. It was a sense of profound failure, of all your carefully laid plans coming to naught. You were a woman who had bent history to her will, a woman who had ruled an empire on the brink of collapse, and in the end, you were just a woman, alone with your memories and the knowledge that your long, hard-fought journey had been an extraordinary one. The end of your life is not marked by the roar of cannon or the panic of retreat, but by the quiet grandeur of your final moments. You lie on your deathbed, surrounded by the golden opulence of chambers you once cleaned as a palace maid. The silk hangings, the intricate jade carvings, and the hushed movements of your loyal attendants are a testament to how far you have risen. It is here, in the heart of the empire you so long controlled, that you finally have time to contemplate the price of absolute power. Your reign lasted nearly half a century, making you one of China's longest ruling leaders, but that power came through sacrificing everything that once defined your humanity. Your son, the boy you had fought so hard to protect and enthrone, died young under mysterious circumstances, a victim, you suspect, of a life he never wanted. Your nephew emperor, a bright, curious boy who should have been a great ruler, remained forever subordinate to your authority. You had silenced his ambitions to secure your own. Countless rivals were eliminated, exiled, or broken to maintain your position, their faces now a haunting blur in your memory. The dynasty you fought so fiercely to preserve faces imminent collapse, unable to adapt to forces you could manage, but never truly control. Yet the transformation remains remarkable. From provincial merchant's daughter to empress dowager, wielding power that affected hundreds of millions of lives. You had not simply survived, you had ruled. Your intelligence network spanned continents. Your decisions shaped international relations. Your reforms modernized an ancient civilization. The forbidden city that once terrified you, with its impossible rules and deadly hierarchies, now seems almost quaint compared to the global forces reshaping human civilization. Railways, telegraphs, modern weapons, and revolutionary ideas have made the palace walls permeable in ways previous dynasties never imagined. The game you mastered was an old one, played with loyalty and betrayal, tradition and ambition. But a new game had begun, and its rules were written in the languages of science and industry, not in the decrees of emperors. In the final moments before you close your eyes, the faces of those who shaped your destiny pass before you, like ghosts in a silent procession. You see the stern but kind face of Emperor Daoguang, the first monarch who saw something in you beyond a pretty face. You see your son, Tongji, his young face marked by sorrow, his eyes reflecting a pain you were helpless to soothe. You see Prince Gong, your co-conspirator and loyal ally, a man who saw in you the same ruthless will and burning ambition that he saw in himself. And finally, you see the faces of your fallen rivals, the consorts, the regents, the ministers, whose lives you sacrificed to ascend to the throne. They are not enemies anymore, just ghosts in the machine, and you wonder if you ever truly hated them, or if they were just part of the game you had to play. Your legacy will be debated for generations, a complex tapestry of triumph and tragedy. Future historians will argue endlessly over your true nature. They will label you a visionary reformer for your support of modernization, for daring to send students abroad and introduce new technology to a reluctant nation. They will praise your strategic genius, your ability to outmaneuver powerful men and rule an empire in a time of unprecedented turmoil. Yet others will condemn you as a stubborn traditionalist for your refusal to fully embrace constitutional rule and your support of the anti-foreign Boxer rebellion. They will brand you a ruthless power seeker, pointing to the elimination of your rivals and the subordination of two emperors as proof of your cold, unyielding ambition. None will be able to deny the extraordinary ascension from palace maid to Empress Dowager, proof that even the most rigid hierarchical systems cannot completely suppress human ambition, intelligence, and the relentless pursuit of survival. You close your eyes, the weight of a lifetime of decisions pressing down on you. The Jade Phoenix, a symbol of your ascension, rose from the ashes only to discover that the sky itself was changing, and even the most powerful wings could not carry ancient ways into a modern world that no longer recognized their authority. You are a woman alone, but you are not forgotten. Your story, a final, poignant chapter in the history of a great dynasty, will be told for 1,000 years.